Well, this is an impromptu recording session. I haven't done a writing revisited in a little while. It's been a little while between this recording session on July 14th, 2024, and whatever was the last recording session for whatever was the last writing revisited video that I did. The writing that I'm going to revisit today is kind of a pseudo mixture of original ideas that I came up with as well as the ideas of other people. I've mentioned it several times on this channel, but I was a younger teenager when the Colossal Kaiju Combat experiment project, whatever you want to call it, was under development, and that involved participating on the discussions and fan creation of content on the Sunstone Games forum that, as far as I know, is no longer in existence for the Colossal Kaiju Combat project, which I've said before, check out other YouTube videos. A number of people have documented the rise and fall of the Colossal Kaiju Combat project, but the relationship that has with today's writing that we are going to revisit is that many people would post their original ideas for kaiju, which would end up as concepts, obviously, for the game, and most of them didn't make it anywhere, but because I was an active member on those forums, and obviously I have a bit of a creative hot streak when it comes to the Godzilla franchise, I would often review and go over the other monsters that people would post and then give my own thoughts and kind of help revise the concepts because I just wanted to see a lot of cool monsters get made, and obviously at the time I was naive and hopeful that eventually they'd get a chance to be added to the Colossal Kaiju Combat game, which obviously never materialized, but one of them required such heavy revision that I actually made a document and saved it, and I kind of took the stuff that was originally in the concept and molded it into an idea that I had kind of fixed. Now, as I've said, I'm pretty sure the Sunstone Games are completely unarchived and thereby inaccessible in the modern age of the internet. If anyone has a link to the monster that I'm going to go over today, drop it in the comments section. If there's an archive that I can look through, please provide it, but I doubt it exists. One of the dogs just walked through my door while I was trying to look something up, so that I can accredit people in this video. I told him that I thanked him for testing the structural integrity of my door. Okay, I found what I needed. This is a kaiju that is known as Whazilla. It's a whale mixed with Godzilla. It says on the image here, I have it cropped on OBS, but the original DeviantArt thing says that the client was Uomo Lupo 99, but this was drawn by a deviant artist who is currently known as Desarath.
These nuts. Got him!
The image says Rody 2013, so maybe they changed their username, or maybe this person on DeviantArt is just a re-uploader of the original art. In any case, this was a monster. Since I'm not entirely sure who the original creator of the concept was, I am just going to refer to them in the generic and just say the creator. And I'm going to call the monster Whazilla for the moment. Whazilla, as far as I can recall, it was literally just a giant whale that was genetically modified with Godzilla's DNA. There we go, that's it. Fast track kudos all around.
Blast facts kudos all around.
I don't remember what it was about the original thing that was appealing to me in a non-rewritten context. And for the record, though the ideas in this video from this document are mine, Whazilla is not my original creation, and if this person still exists on the internet, I am not in contact with them in any way. I just thought this would be an interesting piece of writing of mine to revisit. But hey, I mean, the artwork here is pretty good, so it clearly appealed to more than just me. But this monster never made it past getting posted on the Sunstone Games forum. As you can see here from the LibreOffice Writer document, I have that picture in there. It's blurred, but I mean, it's literally the same exact picture. Okay, so the most important thing that I want to highlight here is that I was basically rewriting and renaming this kaiju so that technically it was the same monster, but but I was removing all the specifically Godzilla-related content. And I'll get to that once I start explaining it a little bit more. But I renamed Whazilla to Balenodon. Balenodon? If I'm not mistaken, I didn't write it down, but it's pretty obvious. I think this was meant to reference the baleen whales species of whale. And of course, the part of the name Nodon is a reference to kind of dinosaur names, because I'm pretty sure that's part of the naming schema for at least one or two species of dinosaurs. Like I said, I wanted to remove the Godzilla-specific naming scheme. Whazilla, Whazilla, whatever you call it. Even as a teenager, I understood that copyright law involving Godzilla was a nightmare. So if this monster wanted to see the light of day, I wanted to make sure that it had a name that wasn't connected to Godzilla. I know technically Godzilla birthed the Zilla suffix for parodies and whatnot, so I guess technically it wouldn't really need the rename, but I'll explain a little bit more as we go. So Balenodon is 74,000 metric tons in weight, which I believe is 24,000 tons heavier than the post-1991 Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah iteration of the Heisei Godzilla. It's 125 meters tall, which I believe is 5 meters taller than Biollante, but I'm not going to edit that out. If that's wrong, it's wrong. Look it up. Its combat style is melee, and its primary attack methods are its fists and its tail fin. Now, obviously, as a derivative of a whale, its tail fin is quite massive, so obviously its tail fin would be a method of attack in a game such as the Pipeworks trilogy of Godzilla fighting games, which Colossal Kaiju Combat was basically going to be the fourth entry in, just minus the Godzilla license. Yes, I know technically they were trying to get the Godzilla license, but honestly, in hindsight, I think that was just cope to try and get people excited for the project. Its secondary attack is Skull Slam, and considering how big it is and the fact that it's a whale, I can see why. Its primary weapon is called the Pressure Spray, which I will explain as we get to it, and its secondary weapon is Coral Spew.
If you're gonna spew into this.
Its energy style is Stamina, which, just to go over that really briefly, stamina energy gain is the way that the energy gain works for most of the monsters in Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee and Godzilla Save the Earth. Godzilla Unleashed had a lot of experimental new systems, and I believe Simon Strange even recognized that the stamina energy style was by far more popular than what they went with in Godzilla Unleashed. Now, there's a bunch of stats listed under here, but maybe I'll go over them, maybe I won't. Most of this that I want to go over is in the overview and the origin. So, Balenodon was originally created, at least in this rewritten version, to be a kaiju eradication weapon. That's really the only word I can really think of to describe it. Balenodon is the freakish result of a genetic tampering project involving two wildly different species of animals, the docile blue whale and the amalgamated genetic material of different sauropod dinosaurs. That was my method of attack for removing the Godzilla genetic code from the origin of this monster. And long story short, they injected mental influence control chips into its brain, and as you can probably guess, yes, it ends up breaking out of containment, but I like the reason that I gave it, and we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so this first paragraph is really just setup. Basically, in a world where kaiju attacks have become far more frequent, world governments decided that there needed to be some kind of answer to the hordes of monsters that were coming out of the woodwork. Specifically, it notes that multiple world governments have fallen and risen based on their ability as a nation to suppress the mega monsters. because naturally the occurrence of giant monsters on the world stage would cause massive upheaval in the power dynamics of existing nations in the real world. And obviously, if you introduce technology that can influence and control them, you open the floodgates, basically, because what if a hostile nation to your nation, whatever nation that is, learned how to control giant monsters for which your nation could not mount a defense? Fortunately, a genius prodigy arose from within the ranks of the international team. I don't think there was a name that had been consolidated for Colossal Kaiju Combat that was analogous to the Global Defense Force from Godzilla Unleashed, hence the generic nature of that statement. So basically, Baleen was the last-ditch effort of a world on the brink of total and utter destruction, because I assume so many monsters had showed up that this project was basically the last-ditch effort to find a way to stop all of the monsters. And this genius prodigy says, hey, why don't we take DNA from dinosaurs and combine it with DNA from whales, I suppose. And I think the basic idea was related to something that I have said in previous videos, which is that there is no replacement for displacement. The bigger they are, the harder they fall, but the bigger they are, the harder it is to make them fall in the first place. And obviously, I believe blue whales are some of the biggest marine mammals alive today. And obviously, dinosaurs were huge, but like I said, I was just trying to come up with a way to make whale mixed with Godzilla DNA without involving Godzilla in any way. It is noted here that the final stage of the development process was, quote, rather controversial because it was very risky. Basically, the genetically altered embryo of Baleen was bombarded with gamma radiation, similar to how the Incredible Hulk was bombarded with gamma radiation, but also a sort of radioactive serum fluid was also pumped into the veins of the developing creature, presumably to keep it alive, because from what I understand, gamma ray exposure pretty much just kills things outright in the real world. And of course, they put in the cybernetic control chips in its brain, but they massively underestimated how big the Baleen creature would be after kind of super boosting the development process through the gamma technologies. And basically, Baleen outgrew its tank before it was even finished development, and obviously it grew to 120 meters in height and a quadrillion metric tons in weight. So it's not that the project failed outright, it's basically just that they underestimated how well it would work, and so the creature grew way too large for them to actually contain. And it is noted here that the stress on the computer chips became too much for the Earth defense systems to handle. And essentially, the microchips in the brain basically went dead, and so they couldn't control the creature at all. But this is where it differs a little bit from typical humanity makes something and it goes wrong origin stories. Because this Baleen was essentially a overgrown infant that had never seen the wild, once it grew to full size, it basically just succumbed to its inherent blue whale instincts and it became rather passive, which I do kind of like, because it's basically a human genetic experiment gone wrong, except it kind of just succumbs to its natural nature and just says, I just want to grill, for God's sakes. But it is noted that because it is an infant and because it was genetically experimented on, Baleen kind of exists in a current and constant state of pain and torment, because obviously as it matures, its body is maturing in ways that its genetics were not necessarily meant to progress. So if you mess with it or otherwise disturb it, it will awaken and it will turn into the kaiju that obviously it was meant to be, and obviously it will revert to basic kaiju instincts. Basically, Baleen is the archetype of the gentle giant. If you don't mess with it, it doesn't mess with you, but the second you do, you're in for for a world of hurt because this thing is huge. Yeah, the energy system is stamina. It's just a giant monster. It just, you know, recuperates energy slowly over time. I really like the ranged combat section. I went over this document before the video, so this isn't a totally raw reaction, but I really like the ideas presented here. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this was all not my creation. I think this existed in the original Whazilla write-up. Basically, the blowhole spout on top of Balenodon has been weaponized by its modified genetics. Balenodon can kind of swallow or absorb salt water, and then using its genetically modified super muscular blowhole, it can kind of shoot a pressurized high-pressure stream of that salt water at opponents, which doesn't necessarily do damage, although I have a feeling it probably could, considering that high-pressure water streams can be incredibly dangerous, but it's not as outright biting as, say, Godzilla's atomic breath would be. But it also consumes coral reefs, I guess, as part of its diet, and so it can basically reach into its own mouth and rip out giant chunks of coral reef. It can basically create things to pick up and throw at opponents, but considering this was going to be based off of the Godzilla Pipeworks trilogy game engine, it would have been really neat if you could have, like, grabbed battering weapons from outside of the Balenodon's mouth. See my video on Godzilla Save the Earth Melee and what they could do with the battering weapons for more detail on the battering weapons. But that would be a pretty neat idea. It is noted here that Balenodon is a competent grappler, but I think most of that is just due to the fact that, considering its size, it is incredibly difficult to grab and get a hold on, so to speak. I know Simon Strange was very proud of the grappling system in Godzilla Unleashed due to its revision in the face of the Destroy All Monsters Melee and Save the Earth grappling, which was just picking people up and hoisting them above your head. I'll be honest, I was never the biggest fan of that, but at the time, obviously, I was working within the confines of the Colossal Kaiju Combat's proposed grappling system, which iterated on Godzilla Unleashed. But it's only a paragraph, so I'm not even really going to read over it. Basically, I think the short version of how the grappling was used in the confines of this proposed Balenodon is that the grappling is basically meant to keep the enemy monsters close so that you can land more punishing physical blows. Yeah, basically Balenodon, due to the musculature that was inherited from the saurian parts of its genetic code, allowed it to basically be a giant fisticuff freight train. It says that it has unrivaled leg muscles. Couldn't be me. As a student of the philosophies that come along with bro science, towards the time I got a girlfriend, I had pretty much skipped leg day for a month and a half or 2 months. So as of July 14th, 2024, it's probably been 5 or 6 months since I've had a dedicated leg workout. But that's not the point. We're not here to talk about my workout regimen or lack thereof. Okay, so here's an important thing. Because Balenodon is derived from a blue whale, it has a very hulking whale tail. And I can't remember the kind of naming scheme for the different families of attacks in Colossal Kaiju Combat, but just think of the fierce moves from Godzilla Save the Earth and Godzilla Save the Earth Melee now. Balenodon's fierce attacks, the circle button on the PlayStation controller, all of those moves are with its tail. So it has a giant whale tail, so it just goes whop. And it says here that most of its attacks are potent enough to send smaller monsters flying. I'm thinking of like Baragon from Godzilla. I don't know which Colossal Kaiju Combat monsters were all that small. Katyusha? The mouse with the mech attached to its back? Anyway, there's a second paragraph under there that says that it is more important to note that Balenodon has super armor on more moves than just its fierce attacks. And it says here that even when Balenodon gets hit mid-attack through that super armor, that Balenodon has plenty of, quote, defense cells. which, if I don't recall correctly, was a system that was proposed for Colossal Kaiju Combat, and basically it reduced the damage of certain moves if you had a certain amount of defense cells. Within the Godzilla Save the Earth, Destroy All Monsters melee, and Save the Earth melee context, though, I imagine that just means that Baleen would probably take reduced damage while in a super armor state. No need to really complicate it too much. It's super armor. As you can see, I made a statistic graph for Baleen. Basically, to sum up the weaknesses section, Baleen does its worst when it is up against fast monsters and monsters that specialize at ranged combat. So I'm thinking of, Showa Mechagodzilla would probably dispatch Baleen pretty easily because, the Showa Mechagodzilla is really specialized in weapon-based combat from a distance. I imagine, a monster kind of like Godzilla Save the Earth Melee Mega Gearus or Save the Earth Fire Rodan would probably deal with Baleen pretty easily. I've also got an elemental resistance image here because elemental typing for attacks and damage was a thing that would have been included in Colossal Kaiju Combat, and Baleen is noted here as being weak versus fire, electricity, poison, and some third thing that I can't even discern from the image. Maybe energy? Like it's weak versus generic energy attacks. And the only things that it inflicts are blunt damage and edged damage, which I am pretty sure pretty much every monster inflicts in some form or fashion. And considering it is genetically based off of whales and also dinosaurs, I imagine it has pretty gnarly claws on its hands. It resists cold, probably because whales are marine life. It resists nuclear damage, radiation damage. I think that's a reference or a holdover from the fact that it was based on a creature that was related to Godzilla, but you can probably just chalk it up within the confines of this revision to it was a genetic experiment. I believe it resists sonic damage also, which probably just has to do with the fact that as a half saurian, half whale, it's so big it doesn't really care about sound waves and shock waves and noise. Also, don't whales communicate with like sonar and stuff? So that's probably why it resists that. And then it also resists lasers? Again, I don't remember what each of these damage types mean. So yeah, that was Baleen, formerly known as Whazilla or Whazilla. Considering it was a whale, I feel like it was Whazilla, but based on how I understand pronunciation of English words, I feel like it was Whazilla. We're not gonna get bogged down in all that. So yeah, tell me what you think of this. Again, I did not create the original kaiju for this. This was just my attempt at revising the character / kaiju so that it could actually be in Colossal Kaiju Combat without running afoul of Toho Company Limited and copyright involving Godzilla, because copyright involving Godzilla is notoriously expensive. Justifiably so in the case of Godzilla, not justifiably so in relation to Godzilla's Rogues Gallery. But that's a topic for another time.
A good question for another time.
Oh boy. Talking for that long without water or any sustenance not only takes it out of me on account of the multiple sclerosis, but it also kills my voice. Also, you probably can't see it, but this glass has Godzilla etched into it. And the funny thing is, I got it on Amazon, and it shipped, and it got here. And I went back on Amazon to see if it was still available, and apparently you can't even buy it anymore. I mean, I presume that means that the original sellers were caught in copyright problems, which I guess is a little bit on topic for this video. And just before I hit the road, I just want to say, no, this is not the monster that I have referred to as being my brother and I's original creation for the Colossal Kaiju Combat project. So you still got time to look that up. Anyways, that about does it for today. Leave a like if any of those ideas were amusing or entertaining to you. I just remember liking that monster, and I wanted to see it get put in into Colossal Kaiju Combat, and if you mix your monster's origin story with Godzilla that heavily, I knew there wasn't a chance. As you guys know from previous videos that I've done, I have made plenty of fan-made Godzilla monsters, but I kind of intuited that the Colossal Kaiju Combat was never going to make it to licensing the Godzilla monsters. Obviously, it never even got off the ground for a non-licensed release. What can you do? Drop a comment telling me what you thought of any of the ideas in this video. If you're the original creator of Whazilla, maybe drop a comment if you somehow happen upon this video. Normally I would say subscribe, but I don't really know what's going to be happening with my work situation, and even though I'm recording this video in the past, I don't know how that's going to affect my future uploads. There's probably going to be 1 or 2 more videos after this, but I wouldn't expect or anticipate to have content regularly coming out after the new year. So subscribe if you want me to have the faintest chance of making this a job, but I highly doubt it. Anyways, I'll catch you on the flip side. Catch you in the next video.